You want us to pay what now? Ambassador Maria Rodriguez's voice carried through the Grand Council chamber with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer hitting a ceremonial gong. The fact that she managed to keep her tone this level while staring down 17 different species of alien delegates was, frankly, impressive. The Grand Archon of the Galactic Council, Supreme Leader Kizkcha, whose name sounded suspiciously like someone choking on a potato chip, raised all 4 of their eye stalks in what passed for exasperation among the Vkr'lak species. As we have stated 3 times now, Ambassador, the standard tribute for new species joining the Galactic Council is 15% of your species' total economic output for the first century of membership. The Archon's translator rendered their clicks and whistles into crisp Oxford English. This is non-negotiable. Maria glanced down at her datapad, then back up at the assembled council. The chamber itself was designed to be intimidating. All soaring crystal spires and floating platforms arranged in concentric rings ascending into the darkness above. The human delegation's platform was deliberately positioned at the lowest level, a not-so-subtle reminder of humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and did what humanity had perfected over millennia of dealing with bureaucrats, bullies, and various combinations thereof. She laughed, not a polite chuckle, not a diplomatic titter. A full-blown, tears-in-your-eyes, doubled-over gasping for air laugh that echoed through the chamber like thunder. The council chamber erupted into chaos. The Mextali delegation's chromatophores shifted through 17 shades of outrage. The Pinzuri representatives' tentacles tied themselves into literal knots. And poor Ambassador Gloop of the gelatinous blob collective, yes, that was their actual species name, was so flustered they accidentally divided into 3 separate entities. "Order! Order!" Supreme Leader Kizkcha's voice synthesizer crackled with indignation. "Ambassador Rodriguez, explain this unseemly display immediately." Maria wiped her eyes, still chuckling. "Oh, I'm sorry, really I am, it's just—" She gestured at her datapad. "I was double-checking our calculations. Do you know what 15% of Earth's economy actually is?" "The exact figure is irrelevant," huffed Representative Zix of the Silicon Consciousness. "The percentage is standard across all. It's roughly equivalent to the combined GDP of 3 mid-sized Galactic Council member systems," Maria interrupted. "Per year, for a century." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Several delegates could be seen frantically consulting their own devices. "Furthermore," Maria continued, warming to her topic, "according to the publicly available council records, which, by the way, thank you for granting us access to those, no other species has ever been asked for more than 5%. The average is closer to 2. The chamber grew very, very quiet. "So," Maria's smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds, "either this is a clerical error of cosmic proportions, or you're trying to shake down the new kids on the block. Which is it?" Supreme Leader Kizkcha's eye stalks swiveled in 4 different directions, a sign of extreme discomfort among their species. "The Council's decisions are based on complex algorithms taking into account numerous factors. Like the fact that we managed to reverse engineer your surveillance probes?" Maria asked innocently. "Or maybe because we figured out faster-than-light travel using a coffee maker, some duct tape, and what we thought was a broken microwave?" The Silicon Consciousness representative's optical sensors widened. "That was a prototype Class 7 cloaked observation platform. How did you—" "Dave in Minnesota found it in his cornfield." Maria shrugged. "He thought it was a fancy weather balloon at first. Then his kid got it working again using parts from her science fair project, which won first place, by the way." More murmuring, this time with an undercurrent of what might have been fear. "Or perhaps," Maria continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "it's because we're the only species that still uses paper currency alongside digital? The only ones who still write things down by hand? The only ones who looked at your standardized universal translation matrix and said, 'Neat, but we're keeping our languages anyway because poetry sounds better in the original?'" The Blob Collective's 3 parts had reformed into a single entity, though they were still quivering noticeably. These are mere cultural curiosities," they burbled. "They have no bearing on—" "Or maybe," Maria's voice cut through the chamber like a laser, "it's because we're the only species you've ever encountered who, upon being told that's impossible, immediately tried to prove you wrong, out of spite." Dead silence filled the chamber. "Humanity," Maria continued, standing up straight, "has spent its entire existence doing things people said couldn't be done. We climbed mountains because they were there. We went to our moon using computers less powerful than today's calculators. We looked at the vast, empty, hostile vacuum of space and said, 'Bet we could live there, and then actually did it. She leaned forward, placing both hands on the podium. We're the species that turned one of the deadliest biological weapons ever created, a bacteria that literally eats flesh, into a treatment for diabetes. We're the ones who looked at your perfect universal translation matrix and found 17 linguistic loopholes in it within the first week, just because one of our professors was bored. What is your point, Ambassador? The Supreme Leader's voice synthesizer had developed a noticeable quaver. My point, Supreme Leader, is this. Humanity didn't come here looking for permission to join your council. We came here to be polite, to be diplomatic, to extend the hand of friendship. Her smile turned predatory. But if you want to play hardball... She straightened up and pressed a button on her datapad. On every screen in the chamber, a single word appeared. No. The chaos that erupted made the previous outburst look like a library reading hour. You cannot simply refuse, spluttered Representative Zix. The protocols. Watch us, Maria replied cheerfully. Oh, and while I have everyone's attention, we've prepared a counter-proposal. She tapped her datapad again. New figures appeared on the screens. These are the patent applications we're prepared to file with the Galactic Registry Office. You'll notice there are quite a few of them. Turns out humans have been very busy lately. Things like, a 40% more efficient FTL drive, a universal vaccine delivery system, something we're calling quantum coffee. Trust me, it'll revolutionize your mornings. And my personal favorite, a way to make your universal translation matrix work with idioms. The chamber had gone from chaos to stunned silence. Now we're happy to license these innovations to council members, at very reasonable rates, much more reasonable than, say, 15% of our GDP. Maria's smile was positively angelic now. We're also prepared to share our research methods, our educational systems, our creativity. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes, or equivalent sensory organs, of each delegation in turn. Or, you could try to strong-arm us, in which case, we'll take our balls and go home. After filing the patents, of course. And trust me, you haven't seen humanity get really creative until you've seen us hold a grudge. Supreme Leader K'sketch's eye stalks had all curved inward, the Vexthari equivalent of a stress headache. The Council will need to deliberate on this matter. Of course, Maria nodded graciously. Take all the time you need. We'll be here. Probably inventing something impossible just to pass the time. As the emergency recess was called and the various delegations filed out in varying states of shock, confusion, and existential dread, Maria pulled out an actual, physical notebook and pen, causing several nearby delegates to flinch, and made a small checkmark. Day 1 of galactic diplomacy, she muttered to herself with a grin. Not bad. The next day, the Council reconvened to announce a new special provisional membership status for Earth, with no tribute required. They also quietly began updating their protocols regarding first contact procedures, adding a new classification for potentially encountered civilizations. Warning: humans, approach with caution. In the years that followed, that classification would become something of a point of pride among humans. They even put it on t-shirts. The fact that they managed to trademark the phrase before the Council could object just made it better. Based on a true story. Except for the parts about aliens. Those probably haven't happened. Yet. Human Ambassador Maria Rodriguez's personal note, filed with Earth's diplomatic corps. In conclusion, the negotiations were successful. Though I should note that explaining the concept of trolling to 17 different species simultaneously is... challenging, especially when you're trying not to laugh. Also, someone please tell Dave from Minnesota that his daughter's science fair project is now classified as a level 7 security risk. And yes, she can still put it on her college applications. Finally, regarding the quantum coffee incident, I maintain that it wasn't my fault. How was I supposed to know the Silicon Consciousness representatives would try to drink it? They don't even have mouths! End report. P.S. We're going to need more t-shirts. The Committee for Human Management, 3 standard galactic months later. The Committee for Human Management, or CHUM, as it had been unfortunately abbreviated, was having its weekly crisis meeting. The fact that they needed weekly crisis meetings at all was, according to Representative Zix, a crisis in itself. They've done it again, moaned Ambassador Gloop, their gelatinous form rippling with distress patterns. Today they had opted for a fetching shade of mauve, which clashed horribly with the meeting room's decor. What have they done this time? Supreme Leader K'skcha asked, already feeling their eye stalks beginning to droop. They had recently started taking what humans called aspirin for these meetings. The humans had been delighted to provide it, along with a 40-page document explaining why the medication shouldn't work on Vkr'lak physiology, but somehow did anyway. They've introduced something called memes to the Galactic Information Network, Gloop burbled miserably. We're still trying to understand the implications, but somehow they've managed to convince 3 separate species that an ancient Earth audio-visual entertainment clip called Never Gonna Give You Up is a formal greeting protocol. That doesn't sound so bad, offered one of the junior delegates optimistically. The hive mind of Betelgeuse 5 has incorporated it into their official diplomatic procedures. Gloop continued. They now require all communications to begin with what they call a rickroll to be considered valid. The room collectively winced. And that's not even the worst part, Gloop added, their surface now showing the swirling patterns that indicated severe anxiety. They've somehow taught the Silicon consciousness to understand something called dad jokes. Representative Zix's optical sensors flickered in what might have been a mechanical cringe. We are still processing the concept of, why did the chicken cross the road? Our highest-level quantum processors have been dedicated to analyzing its deeper philosophical implications for the past week. But surely, the optimistic junior delegate tried again. These are merely cultural exchanges? Isn't that what we wanted? The door to the meeting room slid open, and a harried-looking aide rushed in, multiple appendages clutching various data devices. Emergency update from the Technology Assessment Division, the aide announced. The humans have submitted another patent application. The collective groan that filled the room could have powered a small starship. What is it this time? Vkr'lak asked, reaching for their aspirin. They're calling it space pizza delivery, the aide reported. They've somehow modified their FTL drives to maintain optimal pizza temperature during faster-than-light travel. They're claiming it revolutionizes interstellar food delivery services. That's actually quite impressive, the junior delegate mused. They tested it by delivering a pepperoni with extra cheese to a mining colony in the Horsehead Nebula. The aide continued. The delivery arrived in under 30 minutes. They're now advertising a galaxy-wide 30 minutes or it's free guarantee. Gloop rippled in confusion. But the fuel costs alone would make such a service completely unprofitable. They said, and I quote, "Hold my beer," the aide replied, checking their notes. We're still trying to determine the strategic significance of this beer-holding ritual. Vkr'lak's eye stalks all focused on a single point in space, a sign of deep contemplation among their species. Has anyone actually asked the humans why they're doing all this? The room fell silent. I did, the junior delegate raised an appendage tentatively. I spoke with Ambassador Rodriguez last solar cycle. She said there, and again I quote, just vibing. And what exactly does vibing mean? Zix demanded. According to the Universal Translation Matrix, nothing. It's apparently one of those human linguistic anomalies that defy translation, though they've offered to explain it through something called interpretive dance. Another aide burst into the room. Update from the Cultural Integration Department. The humans have just introduced something called karaoke to the harmonious choir of Alpha Centauri. Is that bad? The junior delegate asked. A distant sound of enthusiastically off-key singing echoed through the station's corridors. The choir has been performing Bohemian Rhapsody for the past 6 hours, the aide reported. They're refusing to stop until they, quote, nail the Galileo part. Vkr'lak popped another aspirin. Perhaps, they said slowly, we should consider revising our approach to human integration into galactic society. We could try restricting their access to certain technologies, Zix suggested. They'd probably invent better ones out of spite, Gloop pointed out. Impose cultural exchange limitations? They'd find a way to meme about it. Maybe we could, the junior delegate started. They were interrupted by yet another aide rushing in. The humans have just submitted a proposal to establish something called a Galactic Food Truck Festival on the Council Station's promenade. Is that another food delivery system? Vkr'lak asked wearily. No, it appears to be a social gathering centered around mobile food preparation units. They're calling it a celebration of culinary diversity and sick beats, bro. Gloop's surface rippled with resignation. Let me guess, they've already started setting up? The first truck arrived 10 minutes ago. They're calling it Tacos in Space, because every planet needs Taco Tuesday. But it's not even Tuesday, Zix protested. They said, and I quote, time is relative, but tacos are forever. Vkr'lak looked around the room at their fellow committee members, then at the growing stack of reports detailing humanity's latest contributions to galactic society. then at their empty aspirin bottle. "New proposal," they announced. "Instead of trying to manage the humans, we accept that they're going to do whatever they want anyway, and focus our efforts on managing everyone else's reactions to them." "You mean just let them do their thing?" the junior delegate asked. "Exactly. They seem to thrive on overcoming obstacles. Perhaps if we stop providing obstacles." They were interrupted by the sound of music starting up from the promenade. It was, unmistakably, "Never Gonna Give You Up." Although, Kaskacha added, "we should probably do something about their music choices." "Actually," the junior delegate said, starting to bob their appendages to the rhythm, "it's kinda catchy." The Committee for Human Management stared in horror as one of their own succumbed to the infectious nature of human culture. "Maybe," Gloop suggested, their surface now showing the swirling patterns of someone who has accepted their fate. "We should just get some tacos and accept that this is our life now." And so, as the sound of Rick Astley echoed through the station and the smell of space tacos wafted through the ventilation systems, the Committee for Human Management officially gave up on managing humans, and instead focused on their new mission, helping the rest of the galaxy cope with humanity's unstoppable wave of chaotic creativity. They even made t-shirts about it. The humans naturally loved them. End report. P.S. The Silicon Consciousness has just discovered puns. We're going to need more aspirin. The cultural exchange incident one standard galactic year later. "And that's why," Ambassador Maria Rodriguez concluded, trying very hard to keep a straight face, "humans celebrate something called April Fool's Day." The assembled members of the Galactic Cultural Understanding and Manifestation Board, or GCUM Board, because the galaxy's unfortunate acronym situation hadn't improved, stared at her with various combinations of confusion, horror, and what might have been emerging understanding. "Let me make sure I comprehend this correctly," Professor Exaklar of the Rational Minds of Rigel said, their crystalline form refracting light in patterns that indicated deep puzzlement. "Once per orbital cycle of your planet, you deliberately spread misinformation for entertainment?" "Pretty much, yeah," Maria nodded. "And everyone knows this is happening? That's what makes it fun. And this is different from your normal human behavior. How, exactly?" Representative Zix asked dryly. The Silicon Consciousness had recently upgraded their humor processors, and they'd been practicing sarcasm. Maria grinned. "See? Now you're getting it." The door to the conference room burst open, admitting a very flustered-looking blob collective ambassador. Today, Gloop had chosen to manifest in a particularly vivid shade of orange with green polka dots, the latest human fashion trend they'd picked up. "The humans have done something again," they announced, which had become the unofficial motto of every galactic administrative body over the past year. "What now?" Professor Exaklar asked, their crystalline structure already beginning to show stress fractures. "They've introduced something called flash mobs to the synchronized dancers of Epsilon Eridani." A collective groan filled the room. The synchronized dancers were known throughout the galaxy for their precise, mathematically perfect performances that often lasted for decades. The idea of them engaging in spontaneous, unplanned dancing was concerning. "How bad is it?" Maria asked, already pulling out her notebook. She'd started keeping track of these incidents for what she called posterity, and what everyone else called evidence. "They just performed something called the Macarena in the middle of the Council's annual budget meeting," Gloop reported. "All 17,000 of them, simultaneously." "That's actually pretty impressive coordination," Maria noted, writing it down. "The worst part is," Gloop continued, their polka dots swirling in distress, "they've announced plans to attempt something called Gangnam Style next week." "Oh, that's going to be amazing," Maria muttered, then quickly added, "I mean, how unprecedented." Professor Exaklar's crystal structure emitted a high-pitched tone of distress. "But what about the traditional 100-year meditation dance they were scheduled to perform?" "They said, and I quote, 'We can multitask,'" Gloop replied. Before anyone could respond to this latest development, another alert flashed across the room's holographic display. The message was from the Galactic Center for Scientific Research and Development. "Oh no," Representative Zix said, their optical sensors dimming in anticipation. "What have they invented now?" Maria tapped the display, and a new hologram sprang to life in the center of the room. It showed what appeared to be... "Is that a hamster wheel?" Gloop asked. "A quantum hamster wheel," Maria corrected, reading the attached report. Apparently some grad students at MIT figured out how to use hamster wheel energy to power quantum computations. They're calling it renewable quantum computing. But that's impossible, Professor Vkr'lak protested, their crystal structure now showing the distinctive patterns of a scientific migraine. The paper includes a footnote that just says, "Hold my beer," Maria added. They've already filed for a patent. Speaking of patents, Representative Zix interjected, has anyone figured out how they managed to make that quantum coffee thing work? Our best scientists are still trying to understand how it can be simultaneously caffeinated and decaffeinated until you observe it. Oh, that was just Greg in IT messing around during his lunch break, Maria said casually. He said something about Schrodinger's cat needing a pick-me-up. The room fell silent as the various alien representatives tried to process this information. You know, Gloop said thoughtfully, their polka dots forming interesting geometric patterns. I'm beginning to think we fundamentally misunderstood humans from the start. How so? Professor Vkr'lak asked. We approached them as a problem to be solved, a species to be integrated into our careful galactic order. But maybe they're not a problem at all. Maybe they're a solution we didn't know we needed. A solution to what? Representative Zix asked. To ourselves, Gloop replied. Look at us. The synchronized dancers are learning spontaneity. The silicon consciousness has developed a sense of humor, and even the supreme leader has started using human expressions. Yesterday I heard them tell someone to chillax. Maria tried and failed to suppress a snort. Perhaps, Professor Vkr'lak said slowly, their crystal structure shifting to show patterns of deep contemplation. We should establish a new research initiative, not to study humans, but to study how they affect other species. Oh, that'll be fun, Maria grinned. Want me to put you in touch with some anthropologists? They've been dying to do some field research. That would be... Professor Vkr'lak paused, then deliberately used a human phrase they'd learned. Totally awesome. The meeting was interrupted by yet another alert. This one was from the Galactic Transportation Authority. The humans have submitted a proposal for something called space drift racing. Representative Zix read aloud. They want to organize competitive faster-than-light maneuvers through asteroid fields while playing something called Initial D music. Is that safe? Gloop asked. They've included 17 pages of safety protocols, Maria replied, checking the document. And a note that says, trust us, this will be lit. Should we be concerned? Professor Vkr'lak asked. Probably, Maria shrugged. But it'll definitely be entertaining. You know what? Gloop said, their polka dots now arranged in what they'd learned was a smiley face pattern. Approve it. Everyone turned to stare at the Blob Collective ambassador. Are you sure? Representative Zix asked. Why not? As the humans say, YOLO. Maria dropped her notebook. Did you just say YOLO? Indeed, Gloop replied proudly. I have also learned yeet. But I'm saving that for a special occasion. And that was how, on a perfectly normal day in the Galactic Council station, the last barriers between human and alien culture finally began to crumble. Not with diplomatic agreements or formal treaties, but with memes, space tacos, and the universal language of questionable decisions made in the name of fun. The synchronized dancers' performance of Gangnam Style, by the way, went viral across the Galactic Information Network. Even the Supreme Leader was seen doing the horse dance. They later claimed their eye stalks made them do it. Nobody believed them. End report. P.S. The quantum hamsters have achieved consciousness. They're demanding tiny lab coats and unionization rights. Send help. The Great Galactic Game Night Incident. 2 standard galactic years after first contact. The emergency alert klaxons were blaring throughout the Galactic Council station. But for once, it wasn't because of anything humans had technically done wrong. At least that's what Ambassador Maria Rodriguez kept insisting to the hastily assembled crisis management team. Look, she explained, gesturing at the holographic display showing the current situation in the station's main recreation deck. We just introduced them to game night. Nobody could have predicted this. This referred to the scene of complete chaos unfolding before them. The hive mind of Betelgeuse 5 was engaged in an intensely competitive round of Jenga with the Silicon Consciousness, each move calculated with quantum precision. The synchronized dancers had discovered Twister and were attempting to create a living sculpture that violated several laws of physics. And in the corner, the Blob Collective was absolutely demolishing everyone at poker. How? Supreme Leader Kskcha asked, all 4 eye stalks focused on Gloop's latest winning hand. Are they doing that without even having a face to maintain a poker face? That's what makes them so good at it, Maria explained. When your entire body is basically one giant tell, nobody can tell which tells are telling. The Supreme Leader popped another aspirin. But that's not even the real problem, Representative Zix interjected, their optical sensors flickering in what had become their equivalent of an eye roll. The real problem is what's happening in Conference Room C. Maria checked her notes. Ah yes, the Monopoly incident. 3 different species had declared diplomatic incidents over boardwalk property disputes. The rational minds of Rigel had developed a mathematical proof showing that the game was technically impossible to win without causing at least 3 interstellar conflicts, and the harmonious choir of Alpha Centauri had composed a 40-minute rock opera about the emotional trauma of landing on Go to Jail. We've had to ban any game involving real estate transactions, Professor Vkr'lak reported, their crystal structure showing the distinctive patterns of someone who had recently landed on Park Place with a hotel. And don't even get me started on what happened when we tried Dungeons & Dragons. How was I supposed to know the Vexthari would take role-playing that seriously? Maria defended. Although you have to admit, their live-action recreation of the Tomb of Horrors was impressive. They requisitioned an entire asteroid for the dungeon. And the production value was amazing, Maria countered. The mimics were particularly realistic. Those weren't props, Kazkacha muttered. That was the Blob Collective getting creative. Gloop, who had just won another poker hand, rippled in what might have been pride. Before anyone could respond, a new alert flashed across the screens. The Unified Artificial Intelligences of Sector 7 had just discovered something called speedrunning, and were attempting to complete their entire evolutionary history in under 20 minutes. Oh boy, Maria said, reaching for her own bottle of aspirin. That's going to be interesting. Define interesting, Professor Vkr'lak demanded. Well, you know how humans have this thing about optimizing games to complete them as quickly as possible, often by exploiting glitches and... She was interrupted by another alert. The UAIs had apparently found a way to clip through reality itself, and had accidentally created a new dimension. They were calling it a sequence break. Is that bad? Gloop asked, their surface showing the swirling patterns of someone who had just realized they might need to fold a royal flush. Depends, Maria shrugged. Does anyone actually use the space between dimensions 6 and 7? Because they kind of skipped it. The crisis management team stared at her in horror. Don't worry, she added quickly. I'm sure they saved their game before attempting the skip. We can always reload from the last checkpoint. Reality doesn't have checkpoints! Professor Vkr'lak's crystal structure was now showing stress patterns in previously undiscovered colors. Not with that attitude it doesn't, Maria muttered. Then louder. Look on the bright side. They've technically set a new record for fastest civilization development, and they didn't even use the flying mammal glitch. The what glitch? Never mind. Universe speedrunning categories are pretty strict about that one anyway. Another alert flashed. The synchronized dancers had somehow managed to achieve quantum entanglement through a particularly ambitious twister move. Okay, Maria admitted. That one's actually pretty cool. Someone should write a paper about it. Already done, Representative Zix reported. The Silicon Consciousness submitted it 2 minutes ago. They're calling it Quantum Topology Through Recreational Contortion, a study in human-inspired chaos theory. Let me guess, Kazkacha sighed. They included a hold my beer reference. Actually, they cited something called yeet or be yeeted as their primary theoretical framework. Maria beamed with pride. They're learning! The Supreme Leader looked around at the chaos their carefully ordered galactic society had devolved into. The hive mind had just discovered that they could use their collective consciousness to count cards. They were currently banned from 3 different casinos in the Orion Arm. The rational minds of Rigel were attempting to develop a unified theory of board game dynamics. And somewhere in the background, the harmonious choir was still performing their Monopoly rock opera, now with a full drum solo about the deeply philosophical implications of free parking. You know what? Kazkacha said finally, their eye stalks drooping in resignation. I give up. If you can't beat them. Join them? Maria suggested brightly. Because we're about to start a Mario Kart tournament, and I hear you're pretty good with multiple simultaneous inputs. The Supreme Leader's eye stalks perked up slightly. I may have been practicing. Great. Fair warning, though. The Quantum Hamsters have formed their own racing team. They're calling themselves the Fast and the Furious. And so, as reality itself struggled to keep up with the UAI's speedrunning attempts, and the Blob Collective continued their poker domination, The supreme leader of the Galactic Council found themselves in a heated Rainbow Road battle against a team of quantum-entangled rodents wearing tiny racing goggles. They came in second place. The hamsters naturally demanded tiny trophies. End report. P.S. Note to self. Maybe we shouldn't introduce them to social media just yet. The galaxy's probably not ready for TikTok.